Hi, Gordon. We frequently get a lot of complaints about transmissions flaring out, and by flaring we mean it usually means it slips. So that's typically what we're referring to, where we've got the transmission under a load, or we've got the engine trying to drive the transmission pretty hard and it's slipping. So it's flaring out. It won't. Typically, what it means is it won't shift from one gear to the other, or as it shifts. And the most common flare is between shifts gears 3 and 4. It seems to slip. And so we're going to do some troubleshooting on this one, but we're trying to drive around and just see if you can hear it, so that we can illustrate what we're talking about. There, you can sort of feel that. There it is. If you can hear that engine running right there, it won't shift. It's actually, this one won't shift between 3 and 4, so it's not as much flaring out and slipping. The transmission's not slipping in this case, but it won't shift between 3 and 4 very well, regardless of the speed of the engine. And frequently, transmission shifting problems are caused by vacuum. So what we're going to do is take this back to the shop and troubleshoot the vacuum system and just show you some of the problems. Now, the very first thing we want to make sure in terms of shifting transmissions is that we do have good filter and transmission fluid. So we're also going to change the filter and transmission fluid just to make sure that that's not causing any of the problems. We got to get good fluid flow through that filter. But usually it's a vacuum problem. And so we're going to show you how to troubleshoot the vacuum system. Now let's see if we can see on film one more time whether it'll not flare out on us. There, it's in second, I'm sorry. There was the shift to 3, and no, it shifted okay to 4 that time. Let's see if we can slow it down and shift it one more time. By the way, if you get a real hard banging downshift between 2 and 1, that's another symptom of vacuum problems in the transmission. It's a very common, frequent problem where it bangs. There it is. It won't shift right there. It's staying in 3rd gear. It won't shift to 4th unless no, not even if I let off the power. It still is in 3rd. It won't go to 4th. It's more than likely a vacuum problem. So let's take it back to the shop and see. Okay, Gordon, now as we mentioned, this particular car, which we just bought, by the way, for one of our nieces, it's having shifting problems, and so we want to look under the hood and first of all check the vacuum, because that's the most likely culprit. And we can see right away that this vacuum system has some problems. This is the way it was when we bought it. Let's look at what's supposed to happen here and how this one has been hooked up. Someone has modified it, and we'll look at what's supposed to be true, and then we'll fix it back to the way it was and see if we can find the problem. First of all, you see, we'll just go through a general vacuum illustration on the engine. The source of the vacuum in one of these turbo diesels is a vacuum pump. Up here at the front of the engine, if you can see where my blue glove is, right there's a vacuum pump, and there's a line that comes up right here. So that's the source of the vacuum. Because it's a turbocharged diesel, it doesn't have like a gas engine has with vacuum on the intake manifold. Instead, we have to create vacuum with a separate pump. So this is the vacuum pump line. Now, if you trace the line, it goes to the brake booster. And the brake booster then is a huge vacuum line, this main vacuum line, and that pulls the vacuum on this brake booster. And so we have 2 orifices here. You can see one has a little bell, it's hooked to a little bell-shaped connection in this line, and the other one is more straightforward. And we'll show you with a vacuum pump that this one is restricted vacuum. It's a lot smaller orifice or slower vacuum. It doesn't have as much vacuum. This one has a lot more vacuum. So it's unrestricted, or it's less restricted than this is. Yep. Okay. Now this one is supposed to go to the transmission modulator system and the EGR valve, which it does, except someone has unhooked that and just plugged it off with a golf tee, which, by the way, does make a really good plug because of the taper effect. At any rate, this line, if we trace it the way it's supposed to be, it goes to a T, that's correct. There's a little orifice missing in here, we're going to have to replace it. And then it goes to another T, and there's a check valve in here, and it goes to this device that's hooked up to the transmission, or I'm sorry, to the throttle linkage. And actually what it's doing is we work the throttle, we'll see that there's a little lever that moves down here. What that does is under heavier and heavier throttle, it leaks vacuum off, and so it lessens the vacuum applied to the transmission modulator. It weakens the vacuum, or it applies less vacuum under heavier and heavier throttle. It's a device intended to sort of simulate what's going on with a gas engine. With a gasoline engine, normally under more and more load or power, you get less and less vacuum at the intake manifold, and that smaller amounts of vacuum is applied to the transmission to make it shift properly. And so we're trying to simulate that same thing with this little device attached to the injection pump, and it's changing the vacuum applied to the transmission under heavier and heavier loads. So this black line right here goes to the transmission modulator, and it's a critical vacuum line. It's the thing that's raising or lowering the vacuum to the transmission to make it shift. And that's typically the vacuum to that line right there is what's causing the shift problems. I mentioned a real harsh downshift sometimes between 2 and 1. It's usually caused by this device, or something is wrong with the vacuum coming from this device. But of course this device also controls vacuum for up and downshift all the way through the transmission cycle. Now this is probably where the problem is for this particular engine, because this part is not hooked up, and it needs to be. And while we're here, let's look at the other source of vacuum. There's another line teed into this big line, and it's operating the various other kinds of vacuum needed for the car. There are at least 3 other vacuum sources in the car. One is to shut the car off. So this line, you see it splits into 3 right here in this particular engine. There are all kinds of variations depending upon whether it's a coupe or a sedan or a federal version or a California version, but generally this line that's unrestricted operates the door lock systems, the air conditioning systems, and the shutoff for the engine. The brown line right here is the shutoff for the engine. So it goes inside the engine compartment, it goes to the ignition switch, and then it comes back out right here and is attached to the back of the injection pump. This, I think it's brown blue. One of them is brown, one of them is brown blue. Yeah, that's a brown with a blue stripe. That comes back and shuts the engine off. So you have to have vacuum to shut the injection pump off. And by the way, if you ever lose that vacuum as you turn the key off, the engine won't shut off, and you'll have to come out here and push this lever and actually starve the engine for fuel to shut it off, which is all that's really happening when you apply the vacuum as you turn the key. So the brown line is the ignition, not ignition, it's applied to the key, and it shuts the car off. Let's see, the door lock system should be, let's see if I recall, it should be the one with the check valve right here in these 2 lines. And then the green should be, make sure that's green yellow. Green yellow should be the air conditioning system. And this one right here then should be the door lock system. Yes, one of them goes to the vacuum supply tank. We evacuate a tank, and then we come back through a check valve right here. So these 2 lines, one of them goes to the tank, the other one goes to the master switch in the door, and we've got a whole separate video on troubleshooting these 2 vacuum lines for the door lock system. And then of course the air conditioning system takes a separate vacuum source. So those are the 3 lines that pull off for the inside of the car. Now if we trace these other lines, we see that we go to this what I call this, let's see, what do they call it? Some kind of a modulator. It's just, it regulates the vacuum to the transmission. And then we go to the EGR system, and given that this is plugged off and not hooked up, and you see this is supposed to be hooked up to this blue line, I suspect that there's some kind of a vacuum leak. Typically it's under here. And if we look, this thing comes off fairly easily. There's supposed to be a screw. This one is broken. That's very, very common. There's a screw that goes right there. Since the screw is already off, I know I'm going to be able to lift this little plastic piece up. And you can see that there's a little break in this little plastic piece, but it goes right down over. And if we look at what happens as we move the throttle, there's supposed to be a little cam lobe, and you can see it right there, that operates a little switch under here. And so actually there's two cam lobes that operate little switches. What they're doing is applying vacuum to this EGR system, but frequently something goes wrong. Usually one of these lines breaks, one of these rubber lines. So you got to make sure that all the lines are connected, and aha, there's the culprit. You see that one is broken. The little tang, the little nipple on that particular one is broken off, and there's the source of the vacuum leak underneath here. So this is all part of the EGR system. The important point is to check and make sure these lines aren't broken, cracked, because they're just rubber lines that, and over time they crack and wear out, and you get a hole. And as soon as you get a leak, it fouls up the entire vacuum sources for the car, for the rest of the car. And that's obviously what's going on with this one. And so we're going to have to change out this unit because that's broken. It's really not very difficult. We happen to have a used one, but of course you can order. This part is available through local supply stores. So we're going to have to hook that back up. There's also one other thing missing. There's supposed to be a little restrictor orifice in here. I happen to have one. Someone has taken it out. It's going to cause the vacuum to not be correct. And if we look at it, one end is a little bit larger than the other, and we want to put that end toward the vacuum line or away from the T, and take that little line out of there and put that back. Now what we're going to do is hook this back up the way it belongs, right here, and then we're going to have to swap this unit out, and we'll do that. Now, one of your very first clues that you might have a vacuum leak in the system is that the car won't shut off when you turn the key off. Either you got a vacuum leak or you don't have any vacuum. It's another thing that could go wrong is the vacuum pump goes out. You need to rebuild this vacuum pump. But if the vacuum pump ever goes out and you don't have any vacuum, you'll never be able to shut the car off either. But the vacuum pump could be working, you've got a leak, and so you don't have enough vacuum to shut that injection pump off. And so when you turn the key off, the car keeps running. It could be that that's an indicator that you have a vacuum leak somewhere, either no vacuum or a vacuum leak. You don't have enough to apply to the injection pump to shut the car off. Now in this one, the thing that broke is that little nipple right there. And so we have another unit. We're just going to swap that out just because that's the easiest thing to do in this particular circumstance. You can see that this one is slightly different because it has a separate valve over here. I forgot even where I got it, what model it's from. We have to be very careful. There, did I get it?
Mm-hmm. I'm filming too, so.
Okay. Okay. I think we got it. Now, the last vacuum adjustment we want to show you is actually on the transmission. And if you go underneath, you can pull a little rubber cap off. We've got this up on a lift right now for convenience, just for illustrative purposes. If you go down on the driver's side of the transmission, up underneath, you see right there, there's a little green vacuum modulator. It's got a vacuum line coming to it. Of course, you got to make sure that that's not leaking. There's a little rubber, a little rubber piece of vacuum line right there. It goes to that vacuum modulator. But I've pulled off the little rubber cover. And as I pull off the cover, there's a little T-handle. And it's used to make adjustments on the transmission. And so turning it clockwise makes the transmission, if it's flaring, it diminishes the vacuum to the transmission. So I show you this little T-handle. It's just a little wrench right there. And by turning it a few clicks, as they say, and a click is about a quarter of a turn, maybe a sixth of a turn. I can't see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So there's 6 notches in the thing, and as you turn it, you push it back into the little notches. It's just a little wrench. So by turning that little T-handle, you can adjust that modulator such that it applies more or less pressure, or more or less vacuum, as it turns out, to the transmission. And as I recall, turning it clockwise makes the transmission flare less. So you ought to try it with just a couple of notches if it's flaring out. In other words, turn it, a quarter to an eighth of a turn, or maybe that's a third of a turn actually. But you can see the notches in the little modulator. There's one, and there's one. There's 6 of them, as I recall, if I'm counting them correctly.
Point to it again, will you?
Right there. Right there.
Okay.
Notch, notch. There's the T-handle that's out. So you pull it out, and then you turn it, and then you push it back in like that. So let me pull it out a little bit with this little pointer, or maybe this tool right here. So I've got it out right now, and now it'll turn. So I could turn it, and I'm adjusting that little modulator. I could turn it back and forth, you see. And I can turn it, and I can adjust the transmission vacuum. So let's just put it right there. Okay. Now, of course, that wasn't a problem with this one, but it is a way as the transmission wears to adjust the vacuum and therefore adjust the flaring or not flaring of the transmission, and it could be as simple as that. And so you can adjust it in increments of a little more than a quarter turn now, just put the cover back on it. And that might improve your flaring problem if you've got one by making an adjustment to that, especially as the transmission wears. Now while we're here, we're going to go ahead and adjust this, or I'm sorry, change this transmission fluid and filter. It's just a matter of draining the fluid out of here, dropping the pan, and the filter is real easy to change. We've got a whole nother video on that. And of course there's a plug in this torque converter, and you can get to it, this hole right here. And so by turning the engine over, and we show this in our video, you can get that plug and drain the torque converter on this car too. It's actually not very common. A lot of torque converters you can't drain. This one you can. Takes a little over 6 quarts of fluid when you drain it out, about 6.5.